Chris Cillizza and Harry Anton of CNN put together what they call a definitive ranking of 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, and it's about what you'd expect from journalists at CNN. So, sitting at number 1 is former Vice President Joe Biden, and we then have Elizabeth Warren at number 2, Kamala Harris at number 3, Kirsten Gillibrand at number 4, and finally, at number 5, we then reach the most popular politician in the country, Bernie Sanders. Now, obviously, I disagree with the rankings here. I think Bernie Sanders should be at the top of this list. But when we get to the second part of the list, that's where it takes an even odder turn. So for whatever reason, they put Eric Holder on this list. Now, I don't get the logic here because I don't think you can find a single person in this country, probably including people from Eric Holder's own family, who would be excited about him running, but they state that since Eric Holder is from Queens and Donald Trump is from Queens, and they both have that shtick to where, it's two guys from Queens facing off. And they think that that's exciting, and also, they state that Eric Holder should be included on this list because he's friends with Obama, and someone who's close to Obama, well, obviously, that's going to play over really well in a Democratic Party primary, so that's their logic. Additionally, they have individuals like Montana Governor Steve Bullock, Cory Booker, Mitch Landrieu, who nobody in the country knows, but the reason why they put him on here is because he's more of an outsider who hasn't held federal office. He was a former mayor, and this is someone who presumably, according to them, would appeal to more anti-establishment liberals, since he's not part of that DC swamp. And they also include Sherrod Brown. Now, to be fair to them, they actually admit that some of the inclusions here are relatively odd, but the weirdest thing about this list is that how can you put the most popular politician in the country at number 5 and put someone like Joe Biden, who is part of the establishment at a time when there's this anti-establishment fervor, at number 1? Well, here's what they say about why they placed Bernie at number 5. Sanders is one of the most beloved politicians within the Democratic Party, even though he's not technically a Democrat. With strong, favorable ratings, he is a proven vote-getter in presidential primaries, earning 43% of the 2016 Democratic primary vote. And in a party that is shifting left, Sanders was left before it was cool. So why is Sanders not higher? He's a white male. Ugh. And Democrats may be looking to turn the page from 2016. Do Democrats really want another primary in which they have to argue about whether one of the major candidates is actually a Democrat or an independent? Well, of course we don't want that, but that's not an argument normal voters care about. When you poll Democratic Party voters, they overwhelmingly approve of Bernie Sanders. So the only people trotting out this tired argument about he's not a Democrat are Democratic Party loyalists, neoliberal hacks, cable news pundits who think that's something that's going to resonate with ordinary Americans. But for the most part, Bernie Sanders isn't included here because he's a white male. That's disgusting. I mean, just the thought of a white male makes me want to vomit. So since Bernie Sanders is a white male and he's at number 5, why would they put a different white male at number 1? Well, here's what they have to say. The former vice president may not seem like the perfect fit for this moment in the Democratic Party. He's older, 75, white, male, and has been in electoral politics for more than 4 decades. And yet, Biden has something that no other candidate in the field has. First, he's on top of early polls gauging the 2020 field. He's leading in national polls, early primary state polls, and in a matchup against Trump. That's no guarantee Biden wins the nomination, but if history holds, it's an indicator he'll be right there until the end. So even though Joe Biden is just another white male, the reason why they placed him at the top of their list is exclusively based on how well he's performing in some of these polls, but they're either lying to you or they're misinformed about other polls from 2017 that showed Bernie Sanders was actually polling ahead of Joe Biden. A University of New Hampshire poll found that Bernie Sanders had a 7-point lead over Biden, and when you look at a September poll from Zogby, Sanders had an 11-point lead ahead of Biden. Now, it's true that more recent polls have in fact found Joe Biden is surging, unfortunately for all of us. But when you are basing an argument off of polls and you're a political analyst, then you always want to take into account aggregate polling data. You never want to base your argument off of one poll because that one poll can be flawed. So when you account for multiple polls and aggregate polling data, it makes your argument more sound because if numerous polls have the same findings, then that gives your argument a little bit more credibility. But what they're doing here is they're just ignoring any poll from 2017 that found Bernie Sanders ahead of the pack. They're ignoring that Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in the country. So I don't fully understand why they make this poll-based argument and put Joe Biden at the top. I think it may just be a case of cognitive dissonance to where they don't want to admit that Bernie Sanders was actually doing really well and has a great chance, but they went on CNN to kind of explain their reasoning a bit more, and unfortunately for them, it really didn't get much clearer because their logic still didn't make any sense.
You guys have a piece out that's getting a ton of buzz and a ton of attention, ranking the top 10 potential contenders for 2020. You've got Joe Biden at the top, Saliza. Walk me through why that's an exciting pick for the party.
Well, I don't know that it's an exciting pick for the party, but I don't know if Donald Trump is president. The question is, do Democrats want to pick their version of Trump or the anti-Trump? Biden, in some ways, is the anti-Trump. Right now, Harry and I write about this in the piece. Typically, the guy or gal who is in first, who is ahead in early polling, tends to be there right at the end. That's Joe Biden right now, ahead in national polling, ahead in early state polling, and ahead, by the way, it's kind of got missed, but ahead by double digits over Donald Trump in general election polling. So at this date, if you're betting, Joe Biden is your best bet. The question, obviously, is he's 75 years old. Does the party want that now? Biden is sort of the establishment wing of the party, and then the next four people Harry and I have ranked, 2 through 5, are all liberals, without question, and I would say liberals and trying to get left of each other as fast as they can. So Warren, Harris, Gillibrand, Sanders. The thing that the argument for Sanders is he's been there the longest. The argument against him is, do Democrats really want to relitigate 2016 in any way, shape, or form? And again, Bernie Sanders is 76 years old. Is that the road they want to go?
Did you not hear me at the beginning of the segment that 70 is the new 40?
Sorry. So I would know. I do think Kamala Harris, Harry and I have her third. I do think she has real potential. First Indian American and African American elected to the Senate in California. You don't write a memoir if you're a politician in 2019 unless you are thinking about running for national offices. There are not coincidences like that.
Well, 2 points. One issue, Harry, with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand that will follow her, that she'll have to answer for us her much more moderate views when she was representing upstate New York. Very different than calling to abolish ICE. Now, what about Elizabeth Warren and the Pocahontas attacks on the president? I mean, do things like that stick, though? Maybe they stick in a general election, but certainly I think she'd wear it as a badge of honor in a primary campaign. And so I think that's a big part of what's going on here. I think why we have Liz Warren, too, is she is someone I believe who could link up both the left wing of the party as well as the more establishment wing of the party. And when you're trying to win a Democratic primary, remember, it's proportional. So you can't just win with 25% of the vote. You need to be able to put together 40, 45, 50% in order to win a nomination. And in my opinion, Liz Warren may be able to do that. Some interesting, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, Poppy, one thing to remember, too, is that if Harry and I did this list at this time for Republicans at this time in the 2016 cycle, we wouldn't have Donald Trump in the top 10.
Right.
Harry might have had him in the top 20 because, as I've mentioned, he's smarter than me. But I wouldn't have had him.
Stop it.
I wouldn't have had him in the top 20. So, look, things change, right? We are analyzing what we know now based on history, based on where we are now, and based on Trump being in the White House. But, I mean, if your favorite candidate isn't in that top 10, if it's, Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, if it's Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, this does not mean that person has no chance.
I do think it's interesting, two names that struck me on this list, guys. Harry, Mitch Landrieu. And Sherrod Brown as well. Why are they striking to you?
I think, we're looking, number one, perhaps outside of the normal sort of choices. And a mayor, very, very difficult to imagine normally that a mayor would end up being a major party nominee. But we could, in fact, see that this time around, especially if the party is looking for someone with experience, but still outside of Washington. In terms of Sherrod Brown, look, he has a very populist record. If you're looking for a candidate who can beat Trump in the Midwest and beat him on his populist ways, who better than a Midwestern senator who is a populist?
So one thing they say is Biden is the anti-Trump. Now, that's technically true, but he's not the right type of anti-Trump. Now, what I mean by that is Joe Biden is an establishment insider, whereas Donald Trump, even if he's doing the bidding of the political establishment, well, he's still perceived as an anti-establishment politician. So when you have someone who's from the establishment go up against someone who is perceived as being anti-establishment, even if Trump is a faux populist, well, that's not really going to go over too well, or it may not go over too well, when there are so many people who are disenfranchised and disenchanted by the political establishment, both parties. So if you really want to defeat Donald Trump, and that's what you care about, Biden isn't the right person at this place and time. Now, they also state Biden is sort of the establishment wing. They admit that. And the next four people Harry and I have ranked, 2 through 5, are all liberals without question. Now, the way that he kind of characterized the other individuals, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, and of course Bernie Sanders, is that they're all kind of in this race to out-liberal each other. But really, that's a mischaracterization, because what this is about is everyone trying to catch up with Bernie Sanders. You have people like Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand suddenly parroting the same policy ideas that Bernie Sanders was talking about, that people like Hillary Clinton said will never ever come to pass just a few years ago. And now all of a sudden, they're talking about things that Bernie Sanders is also talking about. So to say that they're trying to out-liberal each other, that's not necessarily true. It's them trying to catch up with Bernie Sanders. Now, the one area where Bernie Sanders actually falls behind is on abolishing ICE. Kirsten Gillibrand has actually outflanked him from the left here. Now, look, I've made the case to Bernie Sanders that you've got to come out and say you support the abolition of ICE, because there's going to be someone in 2020 who's going to do what the base increasingly wants. Now, 43% of Democratic Party voters want to abolish ICE, and he hasn't gotten on board, so that's his own fault. But that's the one area, though, where you can make the case that Bernie Sanders is going to have to play catch-up and defend himself from the right of another Democrat. So we'll see what happens there, but for the most part, to say that they're all trying to out-liberal each other, no, they're all trying to catch up to Bernie Sanders, generally speaking. Now, one argument that they made for Sanders in his favor is they say Bernie Sanders, he's been there the longest. That's the argument for Sanders, according to them. But the argument against him is, do Democrats really want to relitigate in any way, shape, or form 2016? And also, Bernie Sanders is 76 years old. Well, first and foremost, those arguments against him are not very persuasive, because you placed Joe Biden at number 1 on your list, and he's 75 years old. So we don't care about age, we care about policy. Now, the argument that they say for Sanders that works in his favor is that he's been there the longest. But this is not why we like Bernie Sanders, or why he's electorally viable. Him being there the longest doesn't matter to any of us. What matters to us are the policies that he's promoting. Don't care about how long he's been there. So it kind of goes to show you just how out of touch they are, that they think he's appealing to us because of how long he's been there. Don't care how long he's been there. Yes, he's been there for about 152 years. He's been in politics that long, but we don't care. We care about the policies. That's what it's about. Now, one thing that they say is true, which I think does make Elizabeth Warren a threat, is that they state Elizabeth Warren can link up both the left wing of the party as well as the establishment wing of the party. So this is one thing I do worry about, because knowing that they need to appeal to progressives, and they need progressives like myself to win, more centrist-minded neoliberals might opt for someone like Elizabeth Warren, knowing that that's how they can win us over. Now, Elizabeth Warren is still a great choice. She's definitely been a disappointment in the past and continues to disappoint in many ways, but she is leagues better than someone like Joe Biden. However, she is nowhere near the level of Bernie Sanders in terms of progressivism, so I do worry that her crossover appeal between neoliberals and progressives could make her someone who is a force to be reckoned with in 2016, but again, or in 2020, excuse me. But even if she were to win, I still think Elizabeth Warren, someone who supports Medicare for all, getting money out of politics, regulating Wall Street, is a great choice who can potentially beat Donald Trump. Now, when it comes to Sherrod Brown, they state he has a very populist record. If you're looking for a candidate who can beat Trump in the Midwest and beat him on his populist ways, who better than a Midwestern senator who is populist? Someone who's actually populist, like Bernie Sanders, who won numerous Midwestern states. He won Michigan, Minnesota, Kansas, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Indiana. Sherrod Brown, I don't believe he even co-sponsors Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. So if you're not on board with a policy that more than 60% of the country supports, and more than 70% of Democratic Party voters support, you're not a populist. You don't get to claim the mantle of populism if you're against a really popular common sense policy. So that's their ranking. I wanted to talk about it because it makes no sense to me. If I had to make a list, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren would be near the top. I certainly wouldn't place Bernie Sanders at number 5. But look, to be fair to them, they state that this is really, it's early, right? Things can still change, and I do agree with that. We don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully, Bernie Sanders will win. We don't know, and we also have to anticipate shenanigans from the DNC. They rigged it in 2016, and if we're not fully expecting them to go above and beyond and do that again, I think we're being naive. So we don't know how this will play out, but certainly at this point, Bernie Sanders is going in with an advantage he didn't have before. He has the name recognition. He's the most popular politician in the country, and even if Joe Biden is surging in polls, well, when you account for aggregate polling data, they're probably 50-50 in terms of Bernie winning or leading and Joe Biden leading. So their logic makes no sense. I think the goal here was to place Joe Biden at the top in hopes that this would discourage progressives from being overly enthusiastic about someone like Bernie Sanders. Because look, if they can kind of make it seem as though Joe Biden is inevitable in the same way they did to Hillary Clinton in 2020, then that would behoove them. And a lot of people probably didn't even bother voting for Bernie Sanders in 2016 because they thought, look, it's going to be Hillary. Hillary's going to win this. There's really no point in me voting. So if they can do that again and replicate that strategy, I think that it will be useful. Now, again, I'm speculating about their motives here. Maybe they just genuinely think that someone like Joe Biden has a better shot than Bernie Sanders, and they wouldn't be wrong, but placing Bernie Sanders at number 5 is illogical. It just is. So I don't really get their list, but again, this is CNN. It's about what I would expect from CNN journalists who are painfully out of touch.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.